They say that grief changes a person, that losing someone you love transforms you into someone unrecognizable. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes the person you become is someone you never wanted to meet. Someone cold, someone calculating, someone capable of destroying everything you once held sacred, including your own child. My name doesn't matter anymore. What matters is what I found in that safe, hidden behind my late husband's oil painting of the lake house we never could afford. What matters is how that discovery turned me from a grieving widow into a woman hell-bent on reclaiming what was rightfully mine, no matter the cost. What matters is how I systematically dismantled my own daughter's life, piece by carefully calculated piece. If you're watching this, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these deeply personal stories that remind us all that life rarely unfolds as we expect. I suppose I should start at the beginning, back when I still believed in happy endings. Back when I thought Richard and I would grow old together in that modest 2-story house on Maple Street, watching our daughter Emma bloom into the successful woman she eventually became. Those were the days when I wore my wedding ring with pride, when I introduced myself as Richard's wife at dinner parties, when I believed that love was enough to sustain a marriage through anything. Richard was a good man. Or at least that's what I told myself during our 28 years together. He worked as a mid-level accountant for a regional firm, brought home a steady paycheck, never raised his voice or his hand to me. He attended Emma's school plays, helped her with math homework, taught her to drive in our old Honda Civic. To the outside world, we were the picture of suburban contentment. But marriages, like houses, have hidden rooms, secret spaces where we store the things we don't want others to see. I spent nearly 3 decades playing the role of the perfect wife. I ironed Richard's shirts every Sunday evening, had dinner on the table by 6:30 sharp, smiled politely at his colleagues' wives during company picnics. I organized the household finances with military precision, clipped coupons, comparison shopped for groceries, stretched every dollar until it screamed. While Richard earned a respectable salary, it was my careful management that allowed us to maintain our middle-class facade. But behind closed doors, I felt invisible. Richard would come home exhausted, collapse into his recliner, and disappear into the evening news, or his accounting journals. Our conversations became transactional. Did you pick up my dry cleaning? Don't forget Emma has soccer practice. The property taxes are due next month. The passion we'd shared during our early years faded into polite coexistence, and I found myself wondering if this was all there was to life. This quiet desperation wrapped in respectability. Emma was my pride and joy, though even that relationship became complicated as she grew older. She was brilliant, graduating summa cum laude from business school, landing a coveted position at a prestigious investment firm by age 25. She married David, a successful attorney from a wealthy family, and together they built the kind of life I'd always dreamed of, but never achieved. They lived in a beautiful colonial in the best part of town, drove luxury cars, vacationed in Europe, and slowly, gradually, I began to feel like an embarrassment to them. The holidays became exercises in subtle humiliation. Emma would introduce me to David's family as my mother, never elaborating, while they spoke of their exotic travels and investment portfolios. I would sit at their elegant dinner table, wearing my best dress from 3 seasons ago, pretending not to notice how they looked through me rather than at me. When I offered to bring a dish to their gatherings, Emma would politely decline, suggesting instead that I just relax and enjoy myself, as if I were an elderly relative to be managed rather than her mother. Richard's death came suddenly on a Tuesday morning in March. A massive heart attack while shaving. I found him collapsed on the bathroom floor, still wearing the striped pajamas I'd given him for Christmas. The paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene. And just like that, 28 years of marriage ended with paperwork and a body bag. The funeral was modest but respectable. Emma handled most of the arrangements, coordinating with the funeral home, selecting the casket, writing the obituary. She was efficient, professional, treating her father's death like a business transaction that needed to be managed properly. I sat in the front pew of the Methodist church we'd attended sporadically over the years, accepting condolences from neighbors and Richard's colleagues, nodding appropriately when people told me how sorry they were for my loss. But the real shock came during the reading of the will. Richard had left everything to Emma. The house, his pension, his life insurance, even the small savings account I'd thought we'd managed together. I inherited exactly nothing except his personal effects and a small monthly Social Security survivor benefit that wouldn't even cover the property taxes on our home. The lawyer explained that Richard had updated his will shortly after Emma's wedding, apparently concerned that I might not be able to manage such a large estate on my own. Emma sat across from me in that mahogany-paneled office, her face a mask of professional sympathy. She assured me that nothing would change, that I could continue living in the house, that she would take care of everything. But her tone was patronizing, the way you might speak to a child who needs constant supervision. She promised to increase my monthly allowance, my allowance, as if I were some dependent relative, rather than the woman who had raised her and maintained that household for decades. The humiliation was complete when I discovered the mountain of debt Richard had hidden from me. Credit cards in his name alone, a second mortgage he'd taken out without my knowledge, unpaid medical bills from his father's long illness that he'd never mentioned. Emma handled it all with brutal efficiency, liquidating assets, negotiating with creditors, restructuring payments. But each conversation reinforced my new status as a burden, someone who needed to be managed and contained. The house, my house, the place where I'd raised my daughter and buried my dreams, was put up for sale within 6 months. Emma explained that it was the only way to settle the debts, that she'd found me a lovely apartment in a senior living community where I wouldn't have to worry about maintenance or property taxes. She spoke about it as if she were doing me a favor, freeing me from the burden of home ownership, never acknowledging that she was erasing the last vestige of my independent life. That's when something broke inside me, something fundamental and irreparable. As I sat in my empty house, surrounded by boxes of possessions I was allowed to keep, I realized that I had spent my entire adult life building something that could be dismantled in a matter of months by a daughter who saw me as nothing more than a liability to be managed. The safe was Richard's final gift to me, though he never intended it that way. I discovered it while cleaning out his home office, hidden behind that awful oil painting of a lake house that he'd bought at a garage sale years earlier. The painting had always annoyed me. It was poorly executed and depicted some romantic fantasy of a life we'd never live. But when I tried to remove it from the wall, I felt the weight shift strangely, and I realized it was hinged. Behind the painting was a small wall safe, the kind you might buy at a home improvement store. Richard had never mentioned it, never given me the combination, never hinted at its existence. But I knew my husband well enough to guess his passwords. Emma's birthday, our anniversary, his Social Security number. On the 4th try, his mother's maiden name combined with the year we were married, the safe clicked open. Inside, I found documents that changed everything. Bank statements showing a secret account with over $200,000 in accumulated savings. Stock certificates I'd never seen before, representing investments he'd made without my knowledge over the past 15 years. But most importantly, I found evidence of something that would destroy Emma's perfect life. Detailed records of payments to an offshore shell company that she controlled. Payments that exactly corresponded with missing funds from her employer's client accounts. My daughter, my brilliant, successful daughter, was embezzling money from her investment firm. The documents Richard had collected were meticulous, showing how Emma had been skimming small amounts from numerous client accounts over a period of 3 years. Amounts too small to trigger immediate attention, but substantial enough to fund her luxurious lifestyle. The shell company, registered in the Cayman Islands, was receiving regular transfers that Emma then used for everything from her European vacations to the down payment on her colonial house. Richard had known. Somehow my quiet accountant husband had discovered his daughter's crime and had been systematically documenting it. The dates on the documents showed that he'd been gathering evidence for over a year before his death, photographing statements, copying transaction records, building what could only be described as a comprehensive case against his own child. I sat on the floor of his office until 3 a.m, reading and rereading those documents, trying to understand why Richard had collected this evidence and what he'd planned to do with it. There was a handwritten letter, dated just 2 weeks before his death, addressed to me. In it, He explained that he'd discovered Emma's activities by accident while helping her with some tax paperwork, and that he'd been wrestling with what to do about it ever since. He wrote that he loved Emma too much to see her go to prison, but that he couldn't stand by while she destroyed other people's lives to fund her own greed. He'd been planning to confront her after her latest promotion was finalized, hoping to convince her to find a way to return the money and resign quietly before anyone noticed the discrepancies. The letter ended with an apology to me for keeping this secret and instructions about where to find additional documentation if something happened to him before he could act. Richard's death had saved Emma from facing her father's judgment, but it had also placed that judgment squarely in my hands. As I sat surrounded by the evidence of my daughter's crimes, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. For the first time since Richard's funeral, I held something that Emma wanted, something she needed, something that could destroy everything she'd built. Tell me in the comments below. Where are you watching from? What city? What country? I'd love to know how far this story has traveled, because what I'm about to tell you next happened in small-town America. But I suspect family betrayal looks the same everywhere. The transformation didn't happen overnight. For weeks, I carried those documents like a talisman, studying them, memorizing every detail, understanding exactly what I held in my hands. Emma continued her patronizing visits, bringing groceries I hadn't requested, offering advice about my finances that I hadn't asked for, treating me like an increasingly senile burden who needed constant supervision. She would sit in my tiny apartment, sipping tea from cups I'd owned for 20 years, talking about how well her career was progressing, how David had been promoted to partner, how they were considering buying a vacation home in the Hamptons. All the while, I would nod and smile and ask appropriate questions, never letting on that I knew exactly how she was funding this beautiful life she described. The plan formed slowly, crystallizing with each condescending visit, each dismissive comment, each reminder of my new status as a dependent. Emma had made it clear that she saw me as a problem to be managed, a remnant of her past that required careful handling. She controlled my finances, my housing, even my social interactions, always under the guise of caring for my well-being. But what she didn't realize was that I'd been managing budgets and navigating complex problems for decades before she was born. I started with research, hours spent at the public library, learning about financial fraud investigations, studying similar cases, understanding exactly how regulatory agencies pursue embezzlement charges. I educated myself about offshore banking laws, shell company regulations, the specific penalties for investment fraud. I wanted to understand every possible consequence Emma might face, every legal pathway that might lead to her destruction. Next, I found myself a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I needed someone hungry enough to take on a contingency case against a wealthy defendant, someone smart enough to navigate complex financial crimes, someone ruthless enough to pursue my daughter without sentiment. Gregory Chambers fit all those criteria perfectly. He was a solo practitioner with a reputation for taking difficult cases that larger firms wouldn't touch. And when I showed him Richard's documents, his eyes lit up with the kind of predatory satisfaction that told me I'd found the right partner for my war. Chambers explained that we needed to be strategic. Emma's firm would close ranks around her if they suspected an investigation, and her wealthy husband's family had enough influence to potentially derail criminal charges if we moved too quickly. Instead, we would build an overwhelming case methodically, gathering additional evidence, documenting the full scope of her crimes, ensuring that when we struck, the blow would be decisive. The investigation took 8 months. Chambers hired a EO, forensic accountant, a former FBI financial crimes specialist who could trace the most complex money laundering schemes. We hired a private investigator to document Emma's lifestyle, photographing her expensive purchases, her luxury vacations, her lavish entertaining. We subpoenaed bank records, cross-referenced transaction dates, built a timeline that showed exactly how each stolen dollar had been converted into the trappings of Emma's perfect life. But the most devastating evidence came from Emma herself. Chambers arranged for one of his associates to pose as a potential investor, someone wealthy enough to warrant Emma's personal attention. Over a series of lunch meetings, Emma inadvertently revealed details about her investment strategies, her access to client funds, her methods for moving money between accounts. She was so confident, so secure in her belief that she was untouchable, that she essentially confessed to her crimes without realizing it. During those months, I maintained my role as the grateful, dependent mother. I attended family dinners, accepted Emma's charity, smiled appropriately when she spoke about her success. But inside, I was counting down to the day when I would destroy everything she had built. The same way she had destroyed my independence and dignity after Richard's death. The first blow came on a Thursday morning in November. Chambers filed both, criminal and civil complaints simultaneously. Criminal charges with the district attorney's office for embezzlement and wire fraud, and a civil lawsuit seeking treble damages for the money Emma had stolen. By noon, federal investigators were at Emma's office, seizing computers and files, interviewing colleagues, freezing accounts. Emma called me that afternoon, sobbing, barely coherent. She'd been suspended pending investigation, escorted from her office by security guards while her colleagues watched in shock. David was frantic, trying to understand what was happening, calling in favors with every legal contact he had. But Chambers had done his work well. The evidence was overwhelming, and there would be no quiet resolution to protect Emma's reputation. The criminal trial took 18 months. Emma's legal team tried everything, challenging the evidence, questioning the investigation methods, arguing that she'd been set up by unknown conspirators. But Richard's meticulous documentation, combined with our additional investigation, created an unassailable case. The forensic evidence showed exactly how Emma had stolen nearly $400,000 over 3 years, and exactly how she'd spent it to fund her lifestyle. I attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery like any other concerned citizen, watching my daughter's life systematically dismantled in front of a jury of her peers. Emma's lawyers tried to portray her as a victim of circumstances, a young woman who'd made mistakes under pressure. But the prosecution painted a different picture. A calculating criminal who had stolen from retirees and families, people who had trusted her with their life savings so she could buy designer handbags and European vacations. The civil case ran parallel to the criminal proceedings, targeting not just Emma, but David as well. Chambers argued that David had knowingly benefited from Emma's crimes, that their lifestyle was so clearly beyond their legitimate means, that he must have known the money was stolen. We went after their house, their cars, their investment accounts, their country club memberships, everything that represented the life they'd built on other people's money. David's family tried to intervene, hiring their own legal team, attempting to negotiate a settlement that would minimize the scandal. But I instructed Chambers to refuse all offers, to pursue maximum penalties, to ensure that the consequences would be as devastating and public as possible. I wanted Emma to experience the same helplessness I'd felt when my life was dismantled. After Richard's death, the same humiliation of watching everything you've built disappear, while people who claim to love you make decisions about your future without consulting you. The verdicts came down on the same day. The criminal jury found Emma guilty on all counts, 12 felony charges including embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. The judge sentenced her to 42 months in federal prison, with restitution ordered for the full amount stolen plus penalties. The civil judgment was even more crushing. Emma and David were jointly liable for nearly $2 million in damages, an amount that would require them to liquidate everything they owned and still leave them in debt for decades. But the real victory wasn't the money, or even seeing Emma led away in handcuffs. The real victory was watching the life she'd built collapse the same way mine had, piece by carefully orchestrated piece. David filed for divorce within 6 months, unable to handle the scandal and the financial ruin. Emma's friends abandoned her, unwilling to associate with a convicted felon. Her name became synonymous with betrayal in the tight-knit world of investment banking, ensuring she'd never work in finance again. The house was sold to pay the judgment, along with their cars and jewelry and art collection. The country club membership was terminated. The vacation home in the Hamptons was foreclosed upon. Emma emerged from prison to find herself living in a studio apartment in a marginal neighborhood, working as a night shift data entry clerk for $12 an hour, struggling to make payments on the restitution she still owed. Meanwhile, had been transformed by my victory. The civil judgment provided me with enough money to buy a comfortable home, to travel, to live independently for the first time in my adult life. I established a trust fund for myself, ensuring that no one could ever again control my finances or dictate my living arrangements. I hired a financial advisor, bought quality furniture, took art classes, joined social clubs filled with people who had no idea about my past. But victories like mine come with unexpected costs. The satisfaction I'd anticipated feeling never materialized. Instead, I found myself lying awake at 3 a.m, wondering what kind of person destroys their own child so completely. The mother who had once helped Emma with algebra homework, who had cheered at her college graduation, who had cried with joy at her wedding. That woman had been replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of orchestrating the systematic destruction of another human being's life. Emma never spoke to me again after her conviction. The last conversation we had was during her sentencing, when she turned to look at me sitting in the gallery and mouthed the words, "I hate you," with such venom that I felt physically ill. In that moment, I realized that I had won everything I'd wanted and lost everything that actually mattered. I had my independence, my financial security, my dignity restored. But I had also severed the only meaningful relationship I had left in the world. The worst part wasn't Emma's hatred, though. The worst part was the gradual realization that Richard's documents, the evidence that had started this entire war, had been intended as a gift of redemption. He'd gathered that information not to destroy Emma, but to save her, to give her a chance to make things right before the authorities discovered her crimes independently. His letter had made that clear, but I'd been so consumed with my own humiliation that I'd turned his attempt at paternal protection into a weapon of mutual destruction. Richard had loved Emma enough to risk confronting her about her crimes, hoping to guide her back to the right path. I had hated her enough to ensure that no such path existed, that her fall would be so complete and public that redemption would be impossible. In choosing revenge over mercy, I had become exactly the kind of person Richard had spent his life trying not to be. Years have passed since Emma's conviction, and I've built a comfortable life with the proceeds of my victory. I live in a beautiful townhouse, drive a reliable car, travel when I want to, answer to no one. I have acquaintances but no real friends, because friendships require the kind of trust and vulnerability that I systematically destroyed in myself during those months of planning Emma's downfall. Sometimes I see her around town, usually at the grocery store or the post office, always alone, always looking older than her years. She's lost weight, and her clothes are the kind of practical, inexpensive garments I once wore when money was tight. We never acknowledge each other during these encounters, but I can feel her watching me, studying the woman who used to be her mother and is now something else entirely. I know that people in town whisper about us, about the wealthy woman who destroyed her own daughter, about the daughter who stole money to fund a lifestyle she couldn't afford. Some of them probably think I did the right thing, that crime should be punished regardless of family relationships. Others probably see me as a monster, a woman so consumed with bitterness that she was willing to sacrifice her only child for revenge. Both groups are probably right. I did the right thing in the sense that Emma's crimes deserved consequences, that the people she stole from deserved justice, that someone needed to hold her accountable for her actions. But I also became a monster in the process. Someone who chose the most destructive possible path when other options existed. Someone who valued her own wounded pride more than her daughter's future. The safe sits in my home office now, empty except for copies of the legal documents that chronicle Emma's destruction. Sometimes I open it and look at those papers, trying to remember what I felt during those months of planning and execution. trying to understand the woman I became and whether she was always hiding inside me, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. I think about Richard sometimes, wondering what he would say about what I did with his carefully gathered evidence. Would he understand the humiliation that drove me to such extremes? Or would he be horrified by the thoroughness of my revenge? Would he recognize the woman he married in the person I've become? Or would I be as much a stranger to him as I am to myself? The truth is that I achieved everything I set out to accomplish. I reclaimed my financial independence, restored my dignity, proved that I was capable of complex strategic thinking and decisive action. I demonstrated that the quiet housewife everyone had dismissed as irrelevant was actually someone to be feared and respected. But in winning this war, I lost the last connection I had to the person I used to be, the mother who had once loved her daughter more than anything in the world. Emma will carry the consequences of her crimes for the rest of her life, but I will carry the consequences of my revenge just as long. We are both prisoners now, locked in a shared legacy of mutual destruction that neither of us can escape. She destroyed other people's financial security to fund her greed, and I destroyed our family to satisfy my need for justice. In the end, we both became exactly what we accused the other of being. People willing to sacrifice anything for our own selfish desires. As I sit here now, surrounded by the comfortable life I built from the ashes of Emma's dreams, I sometimes wonder if there was another way. If I had confronted Emma directly with Richard's evidence, given her a chance to make restitution voluntarily, worked with her to rebuild both our lives instead of using her crimes as ammunition for my own war. But those thoughts feel like indulgences now, fantasies about roads not taken that lead nowhere useful. The woman who might have chosen mercy died with Richard. Or perhaps she died even earlier, during those months of subtle humiliation, when I realized that I had become invisible in my own family. The woman who replaced her was forged in grief and rage, and the bitter satisfaction of perfect revenge. She's not someone I particularly like, but she is someone I respect. Someone who refused to be dismissed or managed or patronized ever again. This is my story, told from beginning to end without apology or justification. I found my late husband's secret safe, and what was inside exposed my son's, my daughter's illicit business. But more than that, it exposed something in myself that I hadn't known existed. A capacity for calculated cruelty that both appalls and empowers me. I won my war against Emma completely and decisively. But the victory cost me everything I didn't even know I was fighting for. The safe remains open now, a reminder of the choice I made and the woman I became. Sometimes visitors ask about it, and I tell them it belonged to my late husband, that he used it for important documents. I never mention what those documents were or what I did with them, because that story belongs to a different kind of conversation, the kind we're having right now. I am telling you this story because I need someone to know what really happened, to understand the full scope of what I accomplished and what I sacrificed to accomplish it. Emma knows her part of the story. Richard took his part to the grave. And I have been carrying the complete truth alone for years. You, whoever you are, wherever you're watching from, are now the keepers of this knowledge, the witnesses to a war that destroyed 2 lives so completely that neither victor nor vanquished emerged intact. If this story has moved you, if you've stayed with me through this long journey into the darkest corners of family betrayal, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support means everything as we continue sharing these complex, difficult stories that remind us all how thin the line really is between love and hate, between justice and revenge, between the people we think we are and the people we're capable of becoming. The screen will fade to black now, but the story continues. Emma continues her small, circumscribed life, and I continue mine. And somewhere in the distance between us lies the ghost of the relationship we used to have, before greed and pride and the terrible mathematics of revenge turned us into strangers who happened to share the same blood. That is the real ending of this story. Not the legal victory or the financial restoration, but the permanent severing of the bond that once defined us both as mother and daughter. That is the price of perfect revenge, and I have been paying it every day since.